Welcome to season 6 of the Retail Tea Break podcast. My name is Melissa Moore, the Retail Advisor and Rethink Retail's top retail expert for 2024. Each week, I'll be joined by industry experts, retailers and brands to dispel the myths, share knowledge and give you an insight into the retail industry. You can listen back to previous Retail Tea Break podcast episodes on your favourite podcast platform or, of course, on YouTube. And while you're there, please do subscribe to the podcast so that you get to listen to it first every week. So in the meantime, grab that cup of tea, sit back and listen in to season 6 of the Retail Tea Break podcast. Today, I'm joined by a guest who really knows e-commerce, having worked in the industry for just shy of 20 years. He continues to work with some of the world's biggest brands in strategy and training roles, has been a lecturer in Dublin City University, and has delivered training to over 1,000 companies over the last few years. He also has ownership of a D2C brand, Crua Outdoors, selling into the US market. And last year, he joined analyst firm in New York, RMW Commerce, as their content producer and analyst. Working closely with Rick Watson and his team, they produce a weekly video show and have a podcast dropping later in Q2. And earlier this year, today's guest was added to Rethink Retail's list of top retail experts for 2024. Vinny O'Brien, welcome to the Retail Tea Break podcast.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I'm in good company in that list. Good folks like yourself.
Oh, delighted to be on that list with you, Vinny, and delighted that we finally get to have a chat like this. I know we've been looking to do this for a while. I am in awe of your expertise and your knowledge, and I think we're definitely going to delve into some of that today. So, in the age-old fashion of the Retail Tea Break podcast, I'm going to kick off with our traditional question in the time that it takes to boil a kettle, which I'm told is actually about 2 minutes. Tell us a bit about you and the business.
God, what can I say that you haven't already said? I've been knocking around for a while, as we said at the start, and been lucky enough to work with a lot of Irish retailers. So pretty much in every category that you could imagine, and that's spanning over about eight years of consulting. I work as a partner-based consultancy firm, so we work with agencies who can do implementation, because most people, when you boil it down, they're really looking for someone to do something. That's partly an Irish challenge because we're so small as a nation and we need people to help us out. But I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've got to meet wonderful people, learn about great businesses. And I grew up in retail. So as a 13-year-old, I had my first job as a butcher in the lovely town of Kilcullen, County Kildare. I went in looking for a job after school one day, was bitten by the bug, and I stayed there for 11 years, even as I was a banker in Limerick. I used to drive home on a Friday night to get my underwear washed and to be ready for work the next morning in Nolan's Butchers. So look, retail has always been something I've been into, and I don't know where that came from, really. Just I think I like being around people, and that's got me to where I am today. The kettle has just whistled. I think we're good to go.
I love that, Vinny. That's fascinating that, again, you've been around like so many who are embedded in this industry. You've always known it. It's always been there. It's been that constant, as you say, through everything else that you've done. And the people aspect, was there anything else? Like, was it that buzz on a Saturday afternoon? Because I'm presuming with school going on at that young age that you were in and out, as you say, after school or at the weekends. The people, the buzz. Did you enjoy the selling part?
Yeah, I loved it. I used to get accused of weighing my thumb as well with the meat. That was an old wives' tale. But there was something about living in a village of about 1,500 people where on a Saturday morning everyone congregated, and it was quite a famous butcher, still is. So you had people coming from all different parts of, the county of Kildare, and then from Wicklow and other places to come and get their meat. And they kind of spent time talking and buzzing off each other, particularly on a Saturday morning. It was a really nice place to be. And even on Fridays, people from farms used to come in and go for their lunch. So you really got a sense of what was going on. And the owner, Mr. Nolan, I remember him telling me, you've got to treat everyone the same. And he was kind of explaining that there's some people who don't have much money, and if they're only spending £5 as it was at the time on something, it was as important to them what they were getting, because it was the central family meal every week, to someone who had unlimited money and they were buying like the best of everything. So you really had to understand how those people were kind of emotively connected to what it was they were doing. So it wasn't a transactional thing. And he taught me that quite early. So I loved watching the counter, because we were in this big but small shop and the customers had a certain amount of space, but they might be 4 and 5 people deep and 20 across. So you were constantly watching to see, was was Melissa in a bad mood this morning, or did she have a fight with her husband last night, or did they make a balls of the dinner? And you were kind of watching for those behavioral aspects that are very visual and give you great cues on how you want to behave with somebody. So I love that side of it. I love that people watching. Try not to cut my fingers off while I was doing it as well.
I love that. That's fantastic. But actually, the essence of what you've just talked about there, it's that true traditional retailing. It's that community aspect, because I'm sure there was lots of gossip shared in the butchers on a Saturday morning or a Friday night. And as you said, actually watching people's interactions or their mood, which we don't necessarily do much anymore. I suppose we can't, times have moved on, but I love that traditional aspect of retail, which is really, that's fundamentally what retail is about, the buying and the selling, but kind of keeping people at the forefront. It's customer centricity at the heart, I think, that experience for you.
That old forgotten experience, huh?
Absolutely. And should it be, which kind of brings me on to really where I want to start, Vinny. I kind of look, we know we're, what are we, four years on now since COVID, and we all know the kind of explosive impact that had on the retail industry. But from your perspective then, where are we at right now? And I suppose, look, retail, they always want to grow, they always want to keep getting better. So where are we at? And also, how on earth do you think, from the retailers you're talking to and what you know of what's going on globally, how are they growing right now?
I'll try and take that in sequence, because we're suffering a little bit of a hangover from COVID, and I don't see that there's going to be an end to that anytime soon. I suppose if I apply what I knew going into the pandemic and have a look at what's going on now, it's probably not a lot different. Ireland has always been a really challenging market from a retail perspective to bring people through digital transformation. To go back to when I was working in eBay, we started out in multi-channel in around 2007. And going to a complex market like the UK, we were able to convince progressive retailers very quickly that there was opportunity in big audiences. So eBay presented that as almost like a gift horse to these retailers, but they understood that we can grow to a certain level in our own market, but there's all these other areas that we should be present. We factored at the time that kind of thinking was about 4 to 5 years ahead of what it was in Ireland. In fact, it was probably closer to 7 to 10 years. So we were that much behind in Ireland. And even still today, and during the pandemic, I took on a piece of work with eBay employees directly and 2 chambers of commerce to say, we will provide free onboarding, we will provide free support, and we'll do that on a weekly basis for retailers who want to participate in this kind of a program. And first of all, it took an age to get retailers to really buy into it. Then when they got onto it, they didn't want to give it the time. And I understand it. I know that there's other things that need to be done. But in an era where it was very evident that your customers are all migrating to more digitally enabled ways of operating, it felt like it was a little bit naive. So it was a challenge, because you're constantly pushing a rock up a hill then, and that has kind of continued. Now, what I would say to local retailers, I live in Tralee. It's a very much a market town. It's a retail town. They were not getting the return that they would expect. And I think the expectation was wrong at the outset. So the way I looked at something like eBay, just as a general rule, was to say, well, if it's something that can pay the bills or help you pay rent or pay the rates, it's something worth investing in, because it's one bill less that you're paying on a monthly basis. And then for the other sides of it, it was exploring, well, these are areas that your customers are in, and you're not willing to take a photograph of your stock to get yourself listed on this platform. And I just found that was really, really absurd. And these are the sorts of challenges mentally that you're trying to get through with people. And I thought that, that mindset's not something that's going to shift. It's entrenched. So compare that to global markets where retailers and brands have already decided, we want to be on TikTok, we will engage in Facebook advertising. The mentality side of things is really hard to shift. I think you can present evidence to people and say, look, there's customers in these areas, you have product that they're looking for. You can present the evidence, but we're very skeptical of data. And I think in retail, there's a lot of work that's done on gut feel. So people know their businesses and they know their customers. So then trying to convince them that we're going to present you with this data, but it's 6 months before you're going to see a return on it, or you're going to see the real impact. That's a really difficult thing to get across, because retail is so fast and so busy that people expect, I'm going to move my umbrellas out to the front of the store because it's raining today. I know I'm going to sell 4 more umbrellas than I did yesterday. So I feel like I've got this kind of control, and action equals productivity equals sales, and that's really what I'm thinking through. So the road to kind of embedding technology within businesses is as much a cultural shift as it is a technical requirement or a kind of a customer centricity tool. And that's been the biggest challenge when the growth rate slowed down coming out of COVID. It's back where it was pre-COVID. So I think that's a positive thing. So we're at like somewhere between 8 and 10%, depending on the market you go to. Now, I think retailers are right to be skeptical. So as an industry, we have underserved them from an e-commerce point of view. And the reason I say that is you look at global conversion rates for the last 10 to 15 years, they've hovered around 3%. So if you were to say to a retailer, you're going to open a new store tomorrow, and for every 100 customers comes in, the best you're going to hope for over the course of a year is 3 people out of every 100 purchasing, they would lose their lives. But that's the backdrop of what e-commerce is. So when I look across the world, where is it getting different? It's getting different in niche categories. We also see marketplaces now dominating traffic in pretty much every country. So a marketplace, like for maybe people who are not familiar, is, you know, somewhere that is like eBay or Amazon, where there's a lot of sellers on one side and a lot of people buying on the other. And it's marrying those two activities together to say, we have the greatest range that you could look for. And by virtue of that fact, we're going to get you the best offers that are out there. So marketplaces, and again, I'm going to generalize a bit here, but I've studied about 30 countries in the last 6 weeks. Marketplaces would be responsible for about 60% of overall site traffic in those countries. In the US, where I do a lot of work right now, to give context, Amazon, and this is as of this week, Amazon does about 2.1 billion unique visits per month in the US as the #1 visited website. The next most visited is eBay at 580 million. And then the retail sites that you would expect, like Apple and all these others, they're down to about 100 million. Now, again, further context there is we are fighting for attention and space against these huge numbers, and it becomes increasingly difficult. So in Ireland during the pandemic, there was about 5,000 new entrants to the market, all fighting for ad space, attention from customers, and doing it in a localized environment. There's no way that logic can present a story to say it was tough before COVID. It's even tougher now because we've got more people fighting for that space, and we've less people with the skills to help us figure out what that conundrum looks like. So where I find myself, this is the longest answer of all time, it's a Bateman question answer, is to say that retailers need to figure out what version of e-commerce is right for them. So I think it's saying, are we a social first business? Do we want to create a technical way of working that allows us to work only with our phones because that's what we have, that's what our staff understand, that's where our customers are. So I think figuring out that flavor of where you can actually embed digital into your business is where we find retail at. And, you know, thankfully it's a resilient industry. Thankfully people do understand at some point we need to change, but it's the cultural need to create a little bit of urgency, or maybe greater curiosity is a better way that I could describe it. So don't be afraid to test. Don't be afraid to get things wrong, because, you know, if there's something that we've learned over the last few years with the emergence of TikTok, is that there is no real formula for this. It's a real test and learn environment, which should give us the I suppose the help and the courage to maybe start doing the things that we're uncomfortable with.
But you know what? I've actually never heard it kind of described so well, Vinny. So a couple of things I'm definitely going to come back to: the testing phase, but also people, because people right now in retail generally huge issue. So I want to come back to that. But what version of e-commerce is right for you and your retail? It is such a simple question, and yet, do you know what? Everyone's getting it wrong. And I'm going to put myself out there and say that there's very few that seem, even as a consumer that I am, that seem to be getting it right. So I suppose from your point of view, any good examples across the board or globally of retailers that are on the right platform for what they want to be doing and who they should be serving?
The most relevant, I think, is actually an Irish brand. You may have heard of the Smooth Company.
Yeah.
So Anya and her grandfather started that company a little under 3 years ago. Now, they took a couple of really interesting decisions, and I'll equate one to Sculpted by Amy as well, because they're two of the most interesting brands I've seen emerge, and that's globally. I'm not saying that just from an Irish context, but Anya decided early that she didn't want to take on debt. So I think that was her grandfather in her ear saying, look, if you can do this, do it profitably, do it without taking on board debt. You know, there's something here, and allow the profit that you're making to be repatriated back into the business to build it up. So some of the things she realized early was she wanted to be on TikTok because she knew that's where her customer was going to be. It also meant technically she didn't have to go and learn all these skills or pay agencies or third parties to go and build websites that she needed to maintain or go through any of those hurdles. So there was a realization that's where my audience is. We're a single product business. Let's focus our attention on making great content and entertaining people. And they did that really well. Then it was the commercial savvy to say, we're going to repatriate the money back into new product development. So very quickly, they went from manufacturing in the Far East, which was expensive, costly to ship, and lead times were long, to developing the ability to make that product in Spain. So they were able to do that. Now they've got shorter lead times, smaller MOQs, and they can get product into their hands a lot quicker. So it meant that cash flow was cycling through the business quicker. And then Anya, they didn't really focus in on traditional e-commerce media for purchasing. So they were more on the fact that they're going to get organic through TikTok, and they didn't want to spend a huge amount on these big black boxes where they didn't really know what was going on. And again, that's a skill you have to learn. So they focused it there. They're one of their biggest milestone achievements last year, if you ask them, was the billboard in Manchester. I think it's the second biggest outdoor billboard in the
I
UK.
remember seeing the picture. I
Amazing,
remember
wasn't
seeing
it?
it. Yeah, absolutely.
Such a brave move,
Yeah.
seemingly. Like when you're trying to talk about e-commerce, you don't typically talk about billboards, but I thought it was just a fabulous move. And it's the idea that they're using their success to rebuild a business and make smart decisions along the way. I've been so impressed by them, and just, you know, as well for a young business and young people involved in the business, they're making incredibly bright decisions. And I compare that to someone like Amy Conley and Sculpted. That's still a self-funded business. I think people forget that, you know, over 25 million in revenue in Dubai. They're in New York as of last week. Their flagship store open in the UK. Amy has such clarity and vision for what it is she wants to do. She seems like a very natural, gifted leader. And I've been lucky enough to speak to her kind of in a context like this a few times, and it does come naturally to her. I think her background in retail has been really, really good in shaping the steps that she needs to take to understand her category really well. And I think on two sides, you've got Amy understands the category really well, developing brilliant products. And then on the other side, who is using this channel to its fullest effect to allow her business to maximize its own growth potential. And I just think they're fascinating.
And you know what? There's something about both stories, both incredible businesswomen, that they really know retail because they know retail for their customer. And it's, you know, it almost circles back to what we were saying about you and your kind of, you know, your retail story beginning at a butcher's. These
Mm.
two phenomenal women really have done their homework for their customer. They're in the right channels for their customers. They're speaking to them every day, and it's really working for them. But as you say, they've made really savvy business decisions, but they seem to get retail, and they get modern retail. You know, this is like traditional values, but for 2023, 2024.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's probably helping now is that within the retail organizations, there's increasingly better digital talent coming in. So people who can influence the sorts of brands that we're going to bring on board, the way that we're going to allow them to advertise, and there's a lot more collaboration involved. So I think that that's a real positive step from a retail perspective in general. I love to see that collaboration is kind of key to people's growth. And it's something that, again, if I go back to an Irish context, I think historically we've been poor at it. It's like our data is our secret sauce, or we know our customers better than anyone. I think, you know, and it's how I consult. I like to think I'm an open book. I publish a lot on LinkedIn. You know, when I talk to you then as a client, there's not a lot I'll say on LinkedIn that I won't be able to say to you behind closed doors. So it's this idea of transparency and trust. I think they're so important. It's the first thing that they teach you in eBay. Like the first value you learn in your induction is people are good. And it's a fundamental belief in there that you've got to trust that people are good. And it's the principle that I suppose underpins a lot of retail in general.
Yep, completely agree with you. Because again, this is a people business. I think we forget that with all this incredible tech that's around us right now. At the end of the day, there's a person at the end of the screen or coming through your door that's buying from you. And I suppose talking of those people, our consumers right now, the solutions, whether it's that Sculpted, by Amy is bringing, or whether it's the Smooth Company, have solutions of how to meet them. Have to check, has that changed? Will it continue to change, do you think? Or do you think we'll start to kind of almost just level out a little bit and let it be for the next few years?
Yeah, I give my perspective. I don't know if everyone will agree with it, but I think the solutions that have been designed have been poor. I think concepts like personalization have been probably overplayed. And I go back to what are the constants in e-commerce, and I'll talk about e-commerce rather than retail, just in the context of what we're discussing. And if you look at Amazon's website, it probably hasn't changed dramatically since 1997 when it filed for IPO, and it still has the lion's share of conversion. And look, there's a few things there that have great assortment, great pricing, a great trust promise. But ultimately, the functionality on Amazon it feels like it's god awful. It's an ugly website. It's not pleasant to use. Yet we all do it. I think my fastest ever search to conversion was 11 seconds. I was in Dublin Airport. I knew I wanted a book, went on there, selected the price, gone, done, one click checkout. I don't know, outside of that type of experience, do you need a huge amount more? Like a website, and I've thought about this since we spoke the last time, Melissa, was websites and e-commerce, I think, is a far more transactional part of the retail experience than it is experiential. And I think that's why we've misaligned the things that we've developed. Now, without the development and the desire to create better experiences, we get no innovation. So I think where we're at is this kind of midway point where we're about 15 years into kind of modern e-commerce, and we're finding our feet. So I think a lot of the technologies that are there today are probably too early in their adoption. So things like try before you buy, like trying on an outfit online. I was working on a Microsoft project with a startup nearly 8, 9 years ago on that specific piece of work. So that's been done because of reverse cameras. I don't know if that'll ever be adopted en masse, to say try it on before you buy it, unless we get a policy by government to say, in order to try and reduce returns in fashion, we're going to mandate there has to be and that's an absurd kind of place to be. So I think the technologies that are there are going to pave the way for better technologies. I think where that's going to happen is through more devices, and this will freak some people out, but more devices being connected to the e-commerce experience. So this week, Walmart just purchased Vizio, a TV manufacturing company in the US, for $2.3 billion. And the discussion I had on another podcast Tuesday was, what's the payback period for something like that? And we kind of went a bit deeper to say that if Walmart gave a free TV to everybody in the US, what's going to be the payback period? Now, it's not a purchase of a TV company. It's the purchase of a new ad network for them. And this is one of the things that when I was over in New York at the retail show at the beginning of the year, more and more of the physical display space in retail stores is becoming advertising slots. No matter where you're going, it's really hard to avoid. Even here down in Tralee, we can see Spars where they have, the little digital display, and we drift by them, but they're experiences that are changing how we shop. That's becoming increasingly present from a retail perspective. And the reason it's going to continue is that this is a new revenue stream for retailers. And it's a new way for them to generate revenue that's not about selling products, and it's not hinged on the continued consumption of products, which is slowing down a little bit. Like UK is in recession, Japan was in recession. They're talking about a recession in the US in the first half of this year. So those kind of things are unavoidable. Like the impacts, those economic impacts, we just have to deal with the fallout in retail. So I think the technology that's served us at this point has underserved the real need, because to a point that you made earlier, it's not really thinking as a consumer. We think as a consumer maybe when we are, complaining about something, or we're really happy with a purchase, but we rarely think about, if I was going to spend a day shopping, what are the things that would make my life a lot easier or better? And I don't know that the personalization approach works. Relevancy is key. Convenience is still a thing. We're talking about people who've less time than before. And we walk around with our heads in devices that are ultimately distracting us. So if we're already thinking, well, I'm going to send this to a friend, or I'm going to look up the price somewhere else. How do you design technology to make that in-store experience better? And I think that's probably the challenge where retail finds itself at now, that they've got to start thinking, well, should we have, and again, you can't do this en masse across retail. And I'm thinking local Ireland, the place that I live. How do you convince retailers to invest in technology when really retail, from a tech perspective, is kind of transactional? So I think we have a way to go before the experience side changes. Where I do see positives, and I've worked with Shaw's over the last couple of years. They've done things like integrated social spaces. So they've brought coffee shops into some of their new stores. They've changed formats to say, well, we know that there's a changing demographic. So they moved all their beauty section down to Tralee, and it's bright, and it brings you into the store. And they've brought kids in. So this kind of adjacency approach to understanding what's a more exciting journey for a customer to go on in the store, I find that more interesting than our ability to make those changes online, because we don't have the skills at the volumes that we require to allow these experiences to translate to better online experiences. And I mean that in the here and now. The technology that's there now in 3 years will bring that on quite a bit.
You know what, that's interesting, because it's true. I do start to wonder over the last few years, and again, I know COVID really kind of, pushed forward a lot of what was going on. Have we just kind of shoehorned experiences onto our platforms, into our e-commerce lives, because that's what we're meant to be doing? And again, it comes back to this idea that, are we serving the customer? Are we giving them exactly what they want, when they want it, at 11 o'clock at night or 4 a.m.? Or are we just doing it because we think we have to? So it kind of begs my next question, and I'm almost quite nervous about asking this one. Does that mean, but if we're shoehorning stuff onto platforms that we already have, is it because we're on the wrong platform as retailers? So are you kind of seeing now that as things evolve and online isn't going anywhere, and there are all these new streams, we've talked about TikTok there, should retailers be replatforming?
I think they shouldn't be afraid to ask the question. And
Yeah.
the thing that I found, and this is pretty much global, is most people in our industry right now, and that's on the e-com side and on the retail side, have never done a replatform. So they don't know the depth of the questions that you need to ask. And one of the podcast series that we're running this year is specifically on that. What is the journey you're on? And most people equate platform ownership to a cost, and they say, well, if we're at this level of revenue, how much can we afford to spend? And it's a very two-dimensional approach to what it is that you should be doing. And complexity within your business is probably the first area that you need to consider. Understanding what are your own business requirements, what are your customer requirements. Have you sat down and looked at the customer requirements and see what it is that matters to them? And when you think about it, that's a really good starting point, because we sometimes get afraid to ask consumers what it is they want. And that's probably where I feel there's a massive disconnect, because we as consumers, because we're distracted by phones, we're switched off to what actually would make that experience better for us. And just to go through a couple of quick journeys here, if I think about us in our tent business, we designed an augmented reality element of our website 5 years ago to say to someone, well, if you were to pitch a tent, what matters to you is maybe you want to see what it would look like if it was in your garden, or if you went camping. So we made all of our tents visible and scalable, so that you could go and see, well, if I'm going down to the local river and I don't want the tent pitched too close to the edge in case I slip off during the night like Bugs Bunny and slide in the water, what's an easy way for you to see that and see what space that you might need? So it was this idea of spatial awareness being important to campers, which it is, but it never translated to an experience we could get people to really engage in, to make the purchase decision easier. Whereas we haven't really thought through the consumer experiences that make life easier. We don't think of returns as a problem, or because something doesn't fit, because free shipping and free returns has been the norm. And it's such a false economy. Like, that's been driven by Amazon and eBay saying, we want to beat everyone in the market, so we're giving you this great perk. And they've both been creeping out of that as a norm for the last 2 or 3 years. Amazon's free shipping threshold in the last 12 months in the UK for grocery, for example, has gone from £20 to £30. That's up from free. Whereas most retailers now are saying, how do we get to free shipping? Free returns is a fallacy as well. And, and I say that, and I know lots of people are going to argue with that, but it doesn't make business sense. So how do we get consumers to start thinking about it? It's going to be very difficult. The experiences where maybe it can be a little bit more useful is, and this is why I suppose I was thinking through the challenge for a retailer to go to social and looking at TikTok, we go to TikTok to get away from the daily drudgery. Like, we want to be entertained. We want to switch off from our lives. So we expect entertainment first. And I think when we think about entertainment, there's always a selling aspect. You go to the cinema, you get sold popcorn, you get sold water. Like $5.70 I paid for a bottle of water in our local cinema recently. $5.70. God, I'd love to be able to curse on this because I would say a few expletives. But I accepted that it was part of the experience. My kids were happy. You know, that's the deal you're in for. But paring it back, we've got to decide as consumers first. And the only way we can do that is to be really asked by our retailers, what would make life easier for you? How do we develop experiences that are easier? How do we develop experiences that are better? And it may just be that there's a hybrid approach taken. And I go back to the Apple Store. That's a lovely experience in terms of you get enough exposure to the tech to allow you to engage with it. They have experts on hand to make sure that if there's more questions, they can get answered for you. And you kind of know going in there why you've been in there in the first place. So I think there's a lot of relevancy to the experience relative to what they want to get out of it and what you want to get out of it too. So look, I think we've a long way to go is probably where I find myself. But retailers could do worse than survey people frequently, not just survey with them, but say, we got your results and here's the action that we've taken. And I think that 360 communication actually helps build up trust over time. And trust is really hard to build with people, and trust builds retention and habitual kind of behavior. So they're the sort of things I think can reinforce my need to go back to the same shop.
It's fascinating though. And I think it just almost brings it all back to the fact, are we talking to the customer? Are we listening to the customer? Are we, as you said, they're acting on what they're doing. So it's not necessarily about jumping ship and replatforming. It could actually be with the ideas we're having. Are they the right ideas? And are we, executing them in the right way that are going to enable that shopper to buy, as you said, at whatever time of day and whatever platform?
Yeah, and look, the platform question, it's difficult because in one way Shopify is amazing because I'm gonna really not like myself now. I'm gonna say it democratized technology. God, you can edit that. That's one for the cutting board. But it has made technology more accessible for people. So what it's also done is set this wild expectation, and I think it's done it inadvertently. You're getting enterprise level software for $29 a month. Like, you could run your entire business off the back end of Shopify or BigCommerce or a SaaS solution that's similar. Where it meets its challenge around this idea of replatforming and understanding what you need is that's the base price then you have for technologies. So if you decide, well, we want to do virtual try on because our dresses are a certain size or our pants are cuffed at the bottom, we want to really show that. Your baseline for investing in technology is all of a sudden €30 a month. So if you're being told, well, actually, we have this great software that will reduce your returns by 60%, will increase your customer satisfaction by 80% because they're going to get better results, but it's going to cost you 200 quid a month. You're like, whoa, I'm paying for my entire website and it's only costing me $30 a month. So Shopify has created this inequity between brilliant technologies and their accessibility by retailers who want to explore what the possibility is. So the final point around platforms is we've got to determine the value that it's bringing. And we use that expression all the time, but really, what is that value? Is it reducing a cost in the business? Is it saving someone time with their administrative tasks? And that's where I think technology can be valuable. It's understanding what are those rinse and repeat tasks that people are doing in their job every day. And can we somehow automate those to free up time, and don't fill the void then with other admin? Say, we want to give our staff 10% of their time back or 15% of real time to go and learn new skills. So that's the sort of area I think that you've got to reinvest that saving, not just through monetary value, but you've got to give people a chance to upskill. And I think, with budgets being tight and people not hiring as much, or people maybe letting people go, you need to give people adequate time to go and learn new skills and treat that as an investment in the individual. I couldn't encourage people to do that more and more.
And actually, it's a really good kind of way to lead me on to something I definitely wanted to talk to you about. You know, we know this part of retail is growing massively. You know, even if there is technically a slowdown on people buying online, this skill set isn't going anywhere. You know, the tech is getting more and more complicated. The people we have in retail generally, just full stop, whether it's shop floor, whether it's online, whether it's in an office somewhere, it's getting harder and harder to find them, and it's getting harder and harder to retain them. So I suppose from your perspective, because you've been in the industry so long, and I'd say work with some phenomenal people, what's the answer, Vinny?
It's not straightforward. I always go back to Gordon Newman, who I remember I started in Arnott's at the same time he started in lifestyle, and Gordon was a great proponent of saying, well, retail DNA is really, really valuable. And when I worked at Arnott's at that time, people loved working there. You had people working in that store 20 years plus, 30 years plus, and they have such rich experiences. And what you're trying to say, what the mindset that he taught me was, how do you allow them to do their job better, and how do we learn from them? And it kind of happened in an unfortunate way for him, because lifestyle at the time shut down some stores, and what he wanted to try and do was retain that talent. So he understood that merchandisers and visual merchandisers, I mean, for that, understood product, he understood how people wanted to see it, and they understood how to describe it. So he started redeploying them as people to write better content and merchandise the sites better. And it was a great learning for me to say, well, actually, there's this really rich experience. So how do we exploit more of it and give people the opportunity to do something different? And I think that's where the success is going to come from people, because the technology is going to get quicker. It's going to be more advanced more quickly. We can't be afraid of it. If you're figuring out your own version of it, you need people to be able to make autonomous decisions. You need them to be able to evaluate, is this going to make our lives better or worse? And you can only do that through giving people the comfort around the technology, and even it's not just technology, it's what does it allow me to do. And two of the biggest success stories I've had within my role were around implementation. So, you might get in and design a strategy for someone and design new business processes. Then the question goes up, who can do it? And I worked with Calvin Klein Golf in Cork, and one of the guys, Gordon, if you do listen to this is a shout out to you. Gordon was a personal trainer to the MD, and he said to him one day, look, I'm really sick of doing this. I've done it for 10 years. He got a job in customer service with the brand, and he was there about 3 months, and I needed someone to manage e-commerce projects. And they'd identified with Gordon that he didn't know the technology, but he wasn't afraid to ask questions. So if he didn't know something, he just said, stop, explain that to me. He'd write it down. He learned it. He moved on. And then what developed out of there was he applied that mentality to everything he did. So he got more confident to say, well, I'm going to go to YouTube first and see, can I figure out a fix for this? If he couldn't, then he went to get someone to help. But within a year, he became the e-commerce project lead, and he'd gone from being personal trainer, kind of maybe felt he could do more, to someone with no qualification, to now being an e-commerce project lead. And that to me was such a huge success story. Brian Hewitt in Arnott's was something similar. He came off the shop floor. Brian is one of the most qualified project leads in tech I've seen in retail in recent times. And even Paul, who works with me, used to be a carpenter, had his own building company. He's our head of marketplace integrations. Paul goes through that methodology as well. But it's that mentality of saying, I know you've got a skill set that on paper looks very different to what I need, but do you have the mentality and the attitude? Yes, okay, let's invest in that. And let's work with you, not to set expectations so high that you won't achieve something, but let's set out a way of working and an agenda of work that we know that you can hit those milestones and feel empowered then to make decisions on your own. And I think that's where I see success for people. There's a lot of training materials out there. A lot of it is free. It's actually giving people time and rewarding that time, I think, is the other way, by not taking time elsewhere, reducing overtime or things like that. So it's, again, it comes back to the point I made at the very first instance, was culture has got to adapt before everything else can. And I think if that culture of, slow change management, as opposed to let's do everything now and really quickly and get burned by it, that's where I think people can win.
And I think it's a really good point there. You know, so many people you've spoken about there have come from different directions, doing a cracking job. Again, I don't know what it is about retail. Sometimes we almost think it's formulaic of bringing people on through they have to do certain jobs before they can do another one. But actually, your case in point there, that's not true at all. Some of these amazing people were curious. And it actually seems like that's what's needed more than anything, the willingness to learn and curiosity to seek out how to do the job.
Yeah, and like even if I think back to Arnott's, we really struggled to get buyers on board initially because we were really changing the way that things were working, and some of them were seeing different success levels. But it was the people that were curious, and they said, "Look, I know there's something here. I know we have to look at it. Let's work with it rather than against it." And not that people were trying to stop you doing your jobs, but they need a lot more convincing. So curiosity is one of my favorite traits, except when it kills cats.
Hey, I was hoping you'd say that. So
You
listen,
teed
to
it up so
finish.
well.
Oh, it's got to be done. It's got to be done, Vinny, as always. Last question before I
Sure.
let you go. What's coming up over the next 6 months or for this year?
In general, or
Tell us what's coming up.
I
Business, life. Where are you going on holiday? No, seriously, what are the plans, I suppose, or what are you hoping to achieve business-wise
so
this year?
I think we've got a year of survival ahead of us. I think we've got to almost throw our playbook out the window that we decided at the end of last year was going to be what we have this year. And I think we're going to have to be very tactical in our approach. One of the things I've seen is we fall into habits. So we look to Prime Day and Black Friday as our key trading periods. One thing we've learned from those is that people love being rewarded, or they love that you treat them as VIP customers. Why not do that 6 times a year? Don't discount as deeply, and give yourself a better opportunity of gaining margin and getting that customer acquisition over time. I think they're things that I would like to see. I'm not saying that they're going to happen. I think the idea of replatforming is something that we're increasingly going to have to ask ourselves. Are we on the right platform? Are we doing the right version of e-commerce? B2B e-commerce is growing, and B2B retail is transforming at a rate that we really underestimate. And that's going to further automate our admin processes. So, if we're buying from suppliers that have been doing it for a long time, the way that we operate with them will change. We're going to see the increased growth of marketplaces. The influence of Chinese retail across Europe and the US is going to be massively impactful. And Shein have just started touting for Boohoo's supply chain, and this is when Boohoo have been refused credit or an extension of credit terms. So that sounds very ominous there. I think ASOS are going to be a huge risk. But that business model that they're bringing to life is impacting significantly, both here and in the US. In the US, Temu spent $1.7 billion on advertising last year, making them the single biggest advertiser of all time. So we're going to see costs go up. We're going to see probably people questioning agency partners. What do we need them for? Can we afford to have them on board? And I think out of that, you're going to find that people will naturally start doing their own version of e-commerce because that's all they can afford to do, or that's all they're geared up to do as a business. And I kind of hope that we decide we have a different approach that we want to take. And this is my one final wish for Ireland. I wrote about it in 2011. We should be co-oping services. We're a small fragmented economy. We have, a huge reliance on retail. I think if we were to get e-commerce really right, we would have 4 co-op centers where we can warehouse our products, pay for marketing services, and contribute to marketing budget. If we did that tomorrow, we would corner the market for advertising in our own localities. Tralee, advertising to people living in Tralee, Drogheda, the same, Dundalk, wherever you look at. So they're the sorts of areas that we're moving into. Personally, I'm getting into a lot more content production because articulating a message around replatforming or the complexities of doing it comes across better in video. So spending a lot of time in that space and doing a lot more on trying to bridge that gap between vendors and retailers and saying, there's always value in having a discussion and understanding where you are in terms of your life cycle and understanding the need to understand the signals that you need to say, well, is replatforming a thing? Should we be paying attention to this channel? And that's not easy in the context of the fact we're all busy. So I want to try and create content that people can absorb in their own time. They don't feel overwhelmed by it, and give people the ability to have a little look at the long term. Because one of the first things I learned in eBay was we need long-term thinking. I think if we can adjust our cultures to think in terms of things that go outside an accountancy period, we will sleep better, we will work better, we feel more productive. And hopefully I can also then share some of the things I'm learning in other markets that people can build on here and use in their own decision making. And that kind of feels like it. Outside of that, want to be happy and healthy and get some hair plugs eventually. The front looks great. The back is it's a nightmare. I look like Monty Burns walking down the street, and I slump my shoulders. My posture is terrible, I've been told. So I have a lot of self-reflection and personal development to do.
It's going to be a quiet 2024 for Vinny O'Brien then, by the sounds of it.
The usual, yes, the usual.
Fantastic. Well, listen, if you have enjoyed today's podcast episode, please like and share it. Remember, you can also listen back to past Retail Tea Break episodes on your favorite podcast platform, or of course on YouTube. Connect with myself and Vinny. And if you're not already following Vinny on LinkedIn, why not? And definitely check out his weekly satirical news slot on a Friday. It's epic. And if you've no idea what I'm talking about, go and have a look. And remember then, finally, you'll be able to find the show notes from today's podcast and the transcripts on theretailadvisor.ie. Vinny, you legend. Thank you so much for your time today.
Likewise, Melissa, it's been an absolute pleasure. And keep up this podcast. It is phenomenal, great resource for anyone interested. And your enthusiasm is never... It's something that I absolutely adore. I think if we could bottle it, we would be selling water at higher prices than Prime. So keep it up. It's an absolute tonic for us all.
Thanks, Vinny.